I was standing in the crowd and thought, why don't girls play football?
I was a football suffragette. I had to prove that women could play football. Simple.
In 1921, a ban was imposed on women playing football.
It banned women from playing on grounds under the control of the Football Association and also from using referees.
And it halted the progress of the women's game. The ban was in place for half a century. Then in 1969, the Women's Football Association forced the FA to overturn the ban. 3 years later, on the 18th of November 1972, the first official Women's International took place.
After Scotland won the toss, England kicked off on a rock-hard pitch and were quickly on the attack.
It was very cold.
And despite the icy conditions, both teams played a hard game.
The tension in the dressing room for a start before the game was unbelievable.
England travelled to Ravenscraig Stadium in Greenock to take on Scotland.
And when they walked out that tunnel, I had the tears in my eyes as usual. You get very, very emotional. We knew what we were in for.
Two women who were integral to getting that match off the ground were Patricia Gregory and Elsie Cook.
At half-time, it was 2-1.
The Scots in the early stages fell back in face of, dare one say it, a heavier English team.
In the second half, England just ran riot in the midfield.
Jeannie Allett managed to lob it into the corner. It was a very joyous moment.
I'm Anita Asante. This is the story of that iconic game and the people involved, and what it means for us today. This is My Moments in History, kicking off the women's game.
On a Sunday, I would line the park, put the nets up, find a guy to referee the game. If the goal mouth was full of puddles, I would sweep the puddles. We had no income at all, no fundraising, except for the women in the church guild, women's guild, organised fundraising efforts for us. Other than that, we just had nothing. And all we wanted to do was to play football, to improve the game for girls, to expand the game for girls. It didn't matter where we went, the doors were slammed in our face. Why were we still ostracised? That's the male attitude in Scotland in these days. The women should be at the sink. They shouldn't be daring to pull in a pair of football boots.
And for you, Patricia, can you relate to that story at all? Was it very different?
I was 15 before my father, a Spurs supporter, would take me to football. But it was 1967 and we went down to Tottenham to watch Spurs bring back the FA Cup. And I was standing in the crowd and thought, why don't girls play football? Now, the only means of communication in those days, although we had a telephone at home, was to write a letter to the local newspaper, which I did. They published this, took my picture, and then girls wrote into the newspaper saying they wanted to join my team. And, of course, I didn't have a team. But we met in my parents' front room and decided to form a team. I contacted the local council, and only then did I discover the 1921 rule of the Football Association, which actually didn't ban women from playing football. It banned women from playing on grounds under the control of the Football Association and also from using referees.
How challenging was it to get parents to allow them to actually respond and try and join in football?
A lot of the parents just didn't want to know. They were okay with their daughters playing, but I had to go and collect them. Having found all these England players in the last 5 years, they say, oh, do you remember that you came to Liverpool Street Station to meet me? And then you took me to your parents' house and I stayed overnight before we went off to an international. So I'm afraid a lot of that has gone from my memory. But no, a lot of the parents were just not interested.
Elsie, can you shed some light on maybe some of those attitudes and that you would have got from parents and why you were able to still persevere with trying to get this organised level of football together?
Anita, in Scotland, the church was very important. And on a Sunday, there was no football allowed. Women didn't do a washing and ironing. They didn't cook a meal. Everything on a Sunday was banned. It was a Sabbath day. So we just slipped onto the pitches and played our game. And then one day I was putting posters up for the next game, full of positivity. And I could hear people in the street saying, a women's game? A women's game at Stranhead Park. Never heard the likes of this. And this was coming from men and women. Men wore the trousers. Women were in the kitchen. End of story. I was a football suffragette, and I dreamt away back then of all the things that have happened today. World Cups, Olympic Games, European Cups, professional leagues. I dreamt of that, and I was only 15, but I knew it would come, but it took so blooming long.
We didn't experience that so much. We had very helpful people at the Football Association, individuals who, as I say, helped us in practical terms. What we didn't get was any great amount of financial support. I remember going to see a sports shop in Twickenham, even before the first game, who were willing to give us kit, and they wanted us to wear divided skirts. And I said, the girls will not wear divided skirts. And he was dealing with players who were more used to playing lacrosse and hockey, and they couldn't understand it. And it was years before there was kit, especially for women.
What personal sacrifices have you both experienced for being these determined women at a time where women's football was not readily supported, wasn't visible to a large degree? Like, what did it actually cost you in your life?
Anita, it cost me my husband. He would not tolerate the idea that women were playing football. It was dreadful. And I was the secretary of the Women's Association in Scotland. I was the secretary for a period of 2 years. And he said, right, it's either me or the football. So I went through to Edinburgh to resign as the secretary, and they made me the manager of the Scotland team. I had to go back home and tell him, yes, I resigned. I promised you I would resign, but I'm now the manager of Scotland. Well, you can imagine how he felt. But I had to go. I had to take the route that I had intended taking and keep on that route and promote the game. I hadn't an option.
Patricia, I mean, did you ever feel, within your own sort of inner circle, people close to you, that you were faced with sort of those kinds of attitudes or challenges to stop you from pursuing, your role in the game?
Oh, yeah. I've mentioned my father. He never tried to stop me, but he wasn't a believer in it. And in fact, some members of my family today don't believe that it's been anything important that's been done, shall we say, which I find a surprise. But there are still people today who don't place any importance on what people like Elsie and me, and there are a lot of people, men and women, who've worked to get the game where it is today.
You have both been driving forces within the game to try and make things happen, and you sound very, very resourceful. But are you both annoyed that you didn't get the kind of acknowledgement and recognition for just how much work you've put into providing those opportunities for girls, putting on a national team, international game that's led to us in this historic moment talking about that?
I think there's certainly a little bit of me that is annoyed that what we did all those years ago has only recently been recognised as actually having happened. But you can't do anything other than delight in what has happened, particularly this year.
But oh my goodness, it was a struggle, a real struggle in every way.
What does it mean to you? What's the feeling that they've been working towards, that acknowledgement that you rightly deserve?
I think it only really came home to me when I stood for the national anthem at the opening game of the Euros, and I found that I had tears in my eyes because Old Trafford, it was a big crowd. And then to come to the final at Wembley and to walk up Wembley Way, that was a very moving moment. You can't explain it any other way.
I'm just so proud the game has got where it's got today. It's beyond all expectations. My dreams come true, and we put in so much hard work in getting it here.
I was at the final. I had my 22-year-old great-nephew with me, and he didn't care. It didn't matter that it was women. that they had brought a trophy home after so long. I'd always thought that women would bring a trophy home before the men. And so for that to actually happen, it really lifts your heart.
We went 2-0 down, so I was thinking, oh no, this is terrible, we're going to lose here.
Today, I'm joined by former England player Wendy Owen, who was 18 on that day in 1972.
And then in the second half, we equalised, but the moment for me was when we scored this final goal 3-2, and I sort of leapt off this bench, blanket flying in the air, and I think there's a photograph of that. You know, and we eventually won that game 3-2, and it was just like fantastic.
And also by Calum Best, chairman of Dorking Wanderers Ladies, currently the subject of the BBC Three TV series Squad Goals, Dorking Till I Die.
I find it really incredible hearing stories of the likes of Wendy. Imagine, Sylvia, you said, having the first goal ever scored for an England side. It's incredible.
This is My Moments in History, kicking off the women's game.
Wendy, quick question for you. How many people were in the audience at that game against Scotland?
Right. I found a little write-up. It said that there was about 400 people.
After that game, did you guys realise, like, wow, you know, we're the first England women's team and we've just played this amazing game in front of this audience? Or was it just for you another game on a football pitch?
To be very honest with you, we didn't actually realise we were making history then. Do you know what I mean? We were just girls playing football. We were really pleased that we'd been selected for England, you know, but we didn't realise we were making history. I think we went for a do afterwards with the Scottish team, which we enjoyed as much as the football.
Did you get dressed up for that do, Wendy? Or was you straight out of the changing room?
I really can't remember. I tell you what, I can tell you, right? When we received our letter to say that we'd been selected for the England team, the letter said that the hotel that we were going to be staying at in Scotland, girls weren't allowed to wear trousers. It's a wedding venue, so we wouldn't want to offend any brides. I didn't even own a skirt, so we had to go.
Quick trip to the shops.
Go to the shops, buy a skirt. I wasn't impressed that I got to go out and buy a skirt and take it with me.
Calum, can you imagine turning around to your players and saying you have to wear a specific attire?
They'd probably laugh at me. You know, it's a real catch, isn't it? Because you think back and you think, God, the rules and the regulations and the things that were set in place back then were so unfair and so uncalled for, but it's great that Wendy can sit here and we can kind of laugh about it. Nowadays, I say to my players, if they've got a game Sunday, don't go out on Saturday night, wherein back then, it was a lot more casual to be at the bar and having a drink. I knew my dad's era all enjoyed a drink.
I'm just going to take you back one step, Wendy, to when you saw and met George Best. What was your reaction and your feeling?
Basically, as a young girl, there were no female role models in those days at all. 2 days before we went up to Scotland, we went to Wembley, and that's where Calum's dad, George, was there. I actually met him there, and we chatted. There's Geoff Hurst. He was another role model because of the 1966 World Cup. Geoff Hurst, Georgie Best. So I was actually going past them. I had to brush past them to go down and sit where I was sitting. We were sort of telling stories, I brushed knees with George Best, you know, I brushed knees with and as I say, the players were very interested because we were the first female England team. They'd never seen any female England players or anything before. And then we did this exhibition match, 5-a-side, and after we'd finished playing, they were sort of saying, you're really good and wishing us luck for the upcoming game up in Scotland.
Wendy, what position did you play?
I played centre-back.
You know what I love, if you don't mind, Anita, you know what I love about that is that I think a really enjoyable time in football was that time when my dad played at Fulham. And Wendy, I'm sure you remember, because there's so much video footage of when my dad had it and Rodney had it and they went to tackle each other and the crowd cheered, and it was like player v player on the same team, but having fun with it. It seemed like a really good time in football for fans and for players, and it was very enjoyable, and there seemed to be a bit more of a freedom about it that I think was a really special time.
Yeah, it was, definitely.
Anita, do you mind if I share of how I got into this chairman role? Is that okay?
No, absolutely. Go for it.
Okay, cool. So I was on my social media and I saw this video. It was a campaign called Her Game 2. And Her Game 2 launched a year ago, and it was 10 ladies that founded it that went to football that had dealt with some sort of sexism, right? And it really triggered me. And, you know, as much as I love my dad, I also was raised by my mother. And I thought to myself, maybe there's something more I can do here to support this campaign, because it's not right. Everybody should be welcome everywhere. Simple as that is my belief, right? So I reached out to him and I said, I see you just launched. I would like to get behind you. Can I become an ambassador for you? They were very welcoming. They welcomed me on board. I'm also a fan of a smaller team called Dorking Wanderers, and based in Southeast England, Surrey way. And the owner is a friend of mine who's also the manager, Mark White. And they had just launched a ladies team in 2020 in Tier 7. So I partnered Her Game 2 with Dorking Wanderers. We got to talking and he said, why don't you take this chairman role? And I just thought, wow, this could be my opportunity now to get into football. It's in my blood. I love it. I play it. We're very lucky that somebody like BBC, after I announced it, said, can we document this whole experience? And I just thought this is a great way to show what grassroots football is like for the girls of all ages trying to become the next Wendy, the next Anita. You know, if I can play a little small role in it, I'm more than happy to do it.
Having been part of that lad culture in the past, how do you feel that your involvement with Dorking and women's football more broadly has led to changing you or changing your views within it? Has this made you a new man? Has this whole experience changed you in that fashion?
I think where I am now, you know, doing positive things, and I have been for many years, if I'm honest with you, Anita, and this chairman role allows me to express my passions, my joys, my love for football, the camaraderie that comes with it, the growth aspect of an underdog story, which I've lived my whole life. So I'm grateful for it.
It sounds to me, Calum, that you wanted to turn an idea into actions, you know, and I love that. You've created opportunities for young, aspiring young women to play football. And I recall a time for you, Wendy, you know, where there was a lack of opportunities in England that saw you go off to the USA in a coaching role.
I'm a PE teacher in this country, and my headmaster at my school would not let me start a girls' team. I go out to the US and there's girls playing in the camps, you know, and they're playing with the boys. I couldn't believe that. Girls playing football over there, although it was in its infancy, wasn't seen as a male sport. And that was fantastic for me.
Do you think that's, you know, one reason why the USA women's national team of today have had so much success over the years?
So many more girls will get playing through the schools and the university teams, that they've got a much bigger pool of talent to come through. I went over there 74, 78, 79 and 80. There was no USA team then. So actually, England was ahead of the USA because we had an international team 1972. We should have then been ahead, England. We should have been well ahead.
Yeah.
But we fell behind. As soon as you get a men's club that decides they can't afford to fund the women's team, then they drop it.
Calum, as a chairman of a women's club, how do you think, you know, the lessons we can learn from the USA in terms of the opportunities and the culture of, you know, providing those chances to female coaches and players?
So many English players go to America because of the thriving teams in in college. You know, when you finished high school in America, you go into college. And I think, you know, look at like Alessia Russo. I think, Anita, maybe you did as well. I don't actually know. I was going to ask that as well. Players go to America to play through that college system for 2 years or 4 years or whatever it is, and then come back to England to then join, you know, a professional club. And to answer your question, Anita, I was really lucky to start this role a year and a half ago. And then now, obviously after the Euros and this huge success, there's even more eyes and more noise, as there should be. And I sometimes think to myself, women that paved the way, like Wendy and Sylvia and like yourself, Anita, you know, when there's still a question of why isn't there this and why isn't there that, it must get to a point of like, how long does that have to go on for until there is a level playing field or something that makes more sense than it does now? I know it's in the right direction. I know it's on the right trajectory, but I think somebody who's been around the ladies' game for so long, you go, cool, enough already. Does that make sense?
100%. I mean, I was fortunate enough to go and play in America professionally for 3 years. And it was precisely for that reason. There wasn't the opportunity to play professionally in England. And now you can see that success of the national team now off the back of the game just progressing in this professional manner. Wendy, when you reflect upon your England career, how do you feel about knowing now that you've been such an integral part of England's women's national team and what it stands for today?
I was jumping up and down screaming when we won that Euros, and then my phone started going mad, and I got on my phone and it was all these people texting me or phoning me saying to me, well done, well done. And I said, what are you saying well done to me for? I haven't done it. And they're all saying, oh yes you have, you were the first.
Wendy, just before I go, I wanted to say it was really nice to meet you. Thank you for sharing your stories, and hopefully one day we can say hello in person.
And good luck with all you're doing.
Just a crowd of girls that got together and was really enjoying themselves representing their country.
Today, I'm going to speak to one of the players who took part in that very first official international 50 years ago, England's Lynda Hale.
The fact that we were 2-1 down, and I can remember Pat Davis passing me the ball. I went past one person and shot, and it went right into the bottom left-hand corner.
And Lioness Esme Morgan, who plays for England and Manchester City.
Now girls coming through can really just focus on football without any of the outside distractions.
This is My Moments in History, kicking off the women's game. Were you conscious at all of like just how important and monumental that moment was?
No, absolutely not. I mean, yes, I played for England, but playing for England only meant a lot to just a few family members and maybe somebody you worked with, because women's football wasn't very big.
What kind of challenges do you think did you face at that time?
You usually got, I mean, you hear it quite a lot. Oh, you should be home cooking the tea or doing the washing and stuff like that. And oh, I've only stayed around so I can see you change your shirt.
Esme, hearing Linda's story, telling us about that monumental moment when she scored that goal and the kind of, attitudes that she faced. What do you think about that?
I mean, first of all, I can definitely relate to Lynda saying that when you score, all you can think to do is run. I can't understand how people have the presence of mind when they score to carry through a pre-prepared celebration, because I'm far too excited for that. I mean, I had some of it when I was playing local boys football growing up. You might get the odd comment from other parents that it was going to be an easy game because a girl was playing, but I think I'm very lucky that I've grown up in a time where it's a lot more accepted and widespread for girls to be playing football, so I've never sort of faced the extent of the negative attitudes that Lynda had to.
Esme, how did you deal with that, though, when you had that challenge when you played for that boys' team?
To be honest, I took no notice. To me, it wasn't anything out of the ordinary, and I was always good enough to play with the boys. I was always flying into tackles and not sort of shying away from any of the battle, as it were, at the time.
So let's take a step back in time. I'm going to start with you, Lynda. How did you get involved in football? What was your journey into the game?
My mum always told me that before I could walk, my uncles had made me kick about with them and my dad. So the first time I actually started playing, I played for a local business called Cunard, which are the Cunard shipping line. And when I was 12, on the local common, it was a Southampton Women's Football League. And there was quite a few teams like Flame United. They were the gas board. You had Roy X, which was a Royal Telephone Exchange. And they'd all obviously been established for a little while because they were all older than me. And I was 12 when I played my first game. And I've got my newspaper cutting to this day. Lynda 12 scores on soccer debut.
It's fantastic. What was the pathway like for you into the game, Esme?
Similar to Lynda, really. My dad always likes to tell people that I used to throw tantrums if they said we were going on a walk, but as soon as they said they'd take a ball with me, I'd soon cheer up and just go toddling off after it. But I just played in the playground at school with all my friends, and as I said, joined the local grassroots team, and I played with them until I was about 15. And then my first real experience of a girls' team was I spent 1 year at a grassroots team along with loads of my friends who I'd played with at secondary school. And then the following year, I was lucky enough to join City's Academy. So really my exposure to women's football prior to joining City was fairly small.
And Lynda, during 1972, in that period of time, how difficult was it to get to games? And talk us about that day when you were travelling to play for England.
I was quite lucky because from Southampton, there was 4 players. Myself, Sue Bucket, Pat Davis and Morag Kirkland. So we all travelled together. We travelled by train up to London where we all had to meet. But my biggest memory was of Jeannie Allott. She came from Crewe and she was only 16, and we got up to Waterloo and she was there, and we said, well, how did you get here? She said, I hitchhiked. And she said, I stayed on
Wow.
She said, I stayed on the station all night.
Wow, that's incredible.
I've definitely never hitchhiked to a game unless you can count my dad taking me here, there and everywhere.
Yeah, I totally can relate. And Lynda, seeing how the game has sort of progressed over the 50 years in of women's football to where it is now, what part of it do you feel that you would have enjoyed the most if you had been born in this generation?
The money. No, the fact that, you're together ever such a lot. You do your training. We trained once a week. We used to meet up and we used to have a training session and then play on a Sunday. But you're living together almost, and the camaraderie and all the fact that you're all together all the time is so lovely if you get on.
To that end, I would say, Esme, you're in this current generation. It may be the norm for you since you've grown up with this kind of visibility, but what differences have you noticed in terms of hearing Lynda's story to now?
I think the investment at City and the facilities are just absolutely incredible. And I've really had such an easy journey in the game. And I feel so grateful for people like Lynda and everyone who's gone before me for the work they've put in to progress the game, because now girls coming through can really just focus on football without any of the outside distractions off the pitch. And I think that's such a privileged position to be in.
One of the differences I probably can reflect upon is in my early days when I played at Arsenal, obviously we had the likes of Ian Wright, Patrick Vieira and all these guys, and we were at the same training ground. They were very welcoming, humble guys. It probably still was quite separate, if that makes sense. We still felt, we had our bubble. They had their bubble, like you said, with me on commercial days and things like that. But now, I think, you can confirm this or not, Esme, but it seems as though you've got a lot more of the male footballers using their social platforms to also amplify the women's game at times, and also turning up to games and watching. I saw, obviously, with England, when I played at Chelsea, David Luiz would come to the Chelsea matches and bring some of the players. Do you think that's becoming more of a feature of the women's game?
Yeah, it's definitely more commonplace. And the big ones for me were sort of Mason Mount and Phil Foden at the Euros final. And I've spoken to a couple of the girls. Katie Zellum was sat really nearby them, and she said they were roaring and screaming and shouting throughout the game, like completely invested in it and throwing themselves into it. And obviously they're going to take those stories back to their dressing rooms. And I think it's really, really lovely that they're sort of showing the support for the game and using their platform to spread the word and draw attention to it as well. Because obviously if those players are making it cool to watch women's football, a lot of the fans who follow them who are maybe have pessimistic attitudes towards it might start to change their tune a little bit.
And Esme, what did becoming a Lioness and at that Euro 2022 final moment do for the sport and you personally? How has your life changed since that victory at Wembley?
It was amazing. I was sat in the crowd with all of the friends and families, and when the goals went in, I just had tears in my eyes because I'm close friends with both Toonie and Chloe, having played with them both throughout the England youth age groups and at City. And I was just so happy for them, and it just felt like a huge turning point and defining moment for the game moving forwards, because it wasn't England women, it was just that England had won the Euros.
I was co-commentating that final and I know I was emotional. But Lynda, for you, did you have that moment of, I wish it was me?
That's a difficult one. Of course I would.
Right?
But yeah, I would love to have been there. I'd love to have played at Wembley and scored the winning goal. But don't take anything away from the girls they got now. They did the country proud.
And Lynda, how far do you think we are away from women's football being taken seriously as the men's game is in all aspects, you know, in terms of resources, investment, the visibility across all the broadcasting platforms? Lynda?
I think it's come in leaps and bounds, but there's plenty of room for a lot more. I love watching it on a Sunday at 6:30, the WSL. I mean, women's football now is a real family environment, which is great. But I do feel that it should be a little bit earlier. If you want to go to it, it's quite late for kids.
Where will the women's game be or look like in the next 50 years?
Well, I hope that they get the same money as the men, because they deserve it. It's on everybody's tongue and everybody's talking about it like they talk about the men's, and you get as much support as the men get.
Can agree more. And Esme, after hearing Lynda's incredible journey and story, what feelings and thoughts has her story evoked for you?
I just think it's incredible that you played the first official international match for England, and now look where the Lionesses team has, the support we've got. And just thank you, Lynda, for making history that day, scoring that goal and setting England off on the right foot, because we wouldn't want to be losing to Scotland on our first ever game. So set us off for victory, and I think hopefully the Lionesses can carry on your spirit for a long time.
Thank you, Lynda, for really just empowering all of us, the next generation and future generations of female footballers, to embark on the beauty of which is football. And lastly, any words of wisdom that you want to share with Esme, who's still a young player embarking on her dream?
Enjoy every moment.
Goalkeeping's so far behind the outfield game.
Today, we're focusing on a very specific position, goalkeeper.
I never got goalkeeper coaching regularly until right at the end of my career.
Former Lioness goalkeeper Siobhan Chamberlain and 1972 Lioness goalie Sue Wyatt chat to me about life between the sticks.
Although I do have children and grandchildren, nothing compares with actually standing on that pitch with an England shirt on. As soon as they started to play the national anthem, that says I had tears rolling down my face. Been playing football with the lads for years, and then playing for Macclesfield Ladies, who are a great team and one of the founders of the WFA. And Never in my wildest dreams did I think there would be an England team and me on it.
And Siobhan, obviously being a mum, how does it compare with, pulling on that England shirt? You've got your newborn, straddled across your shoulder right now, but, that's obviously a great sense of responsibility. But what is it like putting on that England shirt?
Walking out for that national anthem, knowing that you're making your family proud is a really big moment, as well as obviously being proud of yourself and exploring, enjoying that moment of that national anthem. That is really special.
Sue, did you choose to become a goalkeeper, or do you feel like goalkeeping chose you?
I think the lads chose me to be in the goal, to be fair. The lads I used to play with on the street, after the 1966 World Cup, we were out playing football every day until it had gone dark so we couldn't see. And we played on the road a lot of the time. And so they didn't want to dive on the tarmac. So they said, Sue, you're in goal. And I just loved it. I did. I loved it. I loved the fact that when we actually got some proper goalposts to play with, it was great to shout at them and tell them, come on, you've got to get it. Come on, wall, get in position and things like that.
And of course, it's great to have both of you, two goalkeepers of different generations. But Sue, that game in 1972, did you feel an extra greater sense of responsibility, especially, in that role as a goalkeeper in the first international game?
Sue Bucket was the number one goalkeeper. And as Siobhan will know, sometimes it's almost like, this sounds awful, but dead men's shoes to get out there on the pitch. Sometimes you're an understudy to another goalkeeper and you would never wish them to be injured or anything. You've got to wait for your turn. And I was only 16. Can you imagine 16? And I think Sue Bucket was probably about 26, something like that. Maybe a bit older than that. So all that wealth of experience she'd got. I did think partway through the match they had a bit of a collision in the goal mouth, and I thought, "Is this it? Am I on?" But Sue was up and back out there again and keeping goal, and we were losing 2-0 at half time, and again you think, are they going to put me on? None of the goals were her fault, but all the time you're thinking, am I going to go on? But that responsibility of being a goalkeeper as well, one mistake. And that's the difference between winning and losing, isn't it? It's not like the other positions in the field. So, and also, as a 16-year-old in the goal, can you imagine? I mean, we've got Sheila Parker there. She was in her mid-20s. Most of the other players were sort of in the 20s. And for me to yell at them, and command my goal area, that was quite a responsibility and quite daunting for me, I have to say, yeah.
How old were you, Siobhan, when you made your debut for England?
I think I was 21 when I made my senior debut. And I think it's a really important point to make about goalkeeping and age. You look at goalkeepers, most of them come into the game at their prime a lot older than outfield players, because you do have that added responsibility, and you have got to be able to command not just your area, not just the actual football side of it, but you've got to command the people in front of you, and that takes a special kind of person to be able to do that, and it often takes a lot more experience and a lot more resilience than maybe you might need as an outfield player. And for Sue to be a 16-year-old out there doing it, then fair play, that's absolutely brilliant. And to kind of get the respect of your teammates as well. Apologies if you can hear gurgling away. It's not me gurgling. It is, in fact, my small baby on my knee.
And how did you become a goalkeeper? Were you inspired into that role, or did you get picked like Sue did with the boys?
I was jealous of my brothers used to play football with my dad down at the park. So I was jealous of them going with him. And I used to do gymnastics and trampolining and every other sport other than football. But because they were spending time with him, it was like, right, I need to do this if I'm going to spend some time with him. So I started from there, and I think I kind of played every outfield position before I ended up in goal. I got bored quite easily as a child, I think. So I played outfield first, and then it was when I had a hockey lesson at school, actually, and I had no interest in hockey whatsoever. and they had all the pads for the goalkeeper. I thought, this is quite cool. So I put the pads on and went in goal and thought, this is quite fun. I was like, I never wanted to play hockey again, but I thought next time we have a football match, I might volunteer myself to go in goal. And I did that and never really stepped out afterwards.
Well, you know, obviously I was a defender, so I have a high level of respect for goalkeepers, but I do think you're all nuts for getting between the sticks. You know, I'm really curious to know actually what it was like in the 70s for you, Sue, you know, fulfilling that role as a goalkeeper. What were the kind of attitudes towards that position?
Well, we never got any specialist training. We just sort of learnt on the job. And with joining Macclesfield Ladies as a new team, we played teams like Manchester Corinthians and Foden Ladies and teams like that. And they just used to absolutely thrash us. 20-0, and so I had lots of practice in the goals. And I do remember getting my name in the paper for the first time when we actually reduced it to 9-0. And they'd said what a good game it had at 9-0. But we didn't even have any nets to start off with. You know, there was a lot of controversy over whether the ball had actually gone through the goalposts or actually gone round it.
I just want to bring in Siobhan here. What do you recall about the early media coverage in your career?
It was always the goalkeepers that got questioned and got kind of the goalkeepers are way behind the outfield players and the goalkeepers aren't good enough. Yes, you'd have some goalkeepers that were good, obviously, and you'd have goalkeepers making good saves, but goalkeeping's so far behind the outfield game because, as Sue said, she never got goalkeeper coaching. I never got goalkeeper coaching regularly until right at the end of my career, and I've not long retired. So it's no surprise that goalkeepers are a little bit behind outfield players, and it will take time for them to catch up. But the players now that are coming through that are playing regularly WSL football and that are England players and national team players, they will have had goalkeeper coaching from the start of their career, from academy days, and that's how you drive standards and that's how you get better goalkeepers.
I love a goalkeeper that is actually vocal, is commanding, having presence, and is an organizer, you know, is mentally switched on, all the things that Siobhan and yourself have talked about. I think it helped me switch on because sometimes I could drift maybe with those clever forwards who are trying to be wily and all of that. So I've always viewed goalkeepers as having a vital role in a team. You know, you're leading in the spine of the team. And when you're good and when you're confident and when you're organizing everyone and you're coming out and commanding your box, I think it just gives everybody else that sense of calm and assuredness as well. And of course, you guys, you know, you build up play. It starts with you. So, you know, you play a pivotal role in how well the team can go forward and drive forward. And that's why I think it's really important to touch on the fact that often goalkeepers, and especially in the women's game, get a lot of criticism. And it was only just, I think, 3 years ago that Emma Hayes talked about should women's goalkeepers play in smaller size goals because on average they're smaller.
Really?
And I was just like, you know, this is an interesting point, but I want to hear the thoughts of actual players that have played in this role.
I'd have been totally insulted. Anything a bloke can do, we can do as well. My dad always said that to me as he was very, very supportive. He had 2 daughters and he always said, anything a lad can do, so you can do. You just do what you want to do, whatever makes you happy.
I think you can open up a whole big kind of can of worms really with it all, because then you could say, well, women have got smaller feet than men. Should it be a smaller ball? They're not as fast as men. They're not as aerobic. They haven't got the same aerobic capacity. They're not as powerful. Should you then have a smaller pitch? Should you then reduce the duration of the game? There's so many things that you can then look at. It's not just the size of goals because of height. There's so many things of the differences between men and women that you could then say, well, do we need to change in the game? But I think that's what makes the game special, is the women's game is slightly different to the men's game. It might not be as direct and as powerful, but there's such good qualities to watching women's football. And a lot of people have probably watched it for the first time over this summer and grown to love it, especially with the success of the Lionesses. But you don't necessarily need to have it exactly the same type of game as men's football, if that kind of makes sense.
I'd love to hear from you, Sue, about what you make of women's goalkeepers today. What are you seeing compared to your time?
I am in awe of them. I really am. And it's great to see that they've come so far. The football that women are playing in general is great. But for me, I sit there wishing that I could have done the same thing, wishing that we could have had that sort of training and yeah, it's wonderful to see such competent footballers. They're just brilliant.
If it wasn't for you and the experiences that you had and you experienced, those players and myself and Anita, even as an outfield player, wouldn't have been able to have the experiences that we had. You're still a part of what they're doing now, even though you're not out there on the pitch with them, and I think that's important to remember.
That's really, really kind of you, and I was impressed with when Jill Scott said the same thing when they won the Euros, and she said every woman who's ever played football, for England, has their hands on this trophy, and I was in bits, absolute bits, and I thought these young women actually know what it's like to fight and come through, and they've remembered their history. I'd like to thank you for remembering that.
I did sleep on a London station after one of the international matches because who had money in those days?
In these short podcasts, we've been following the story of the first official women's international between Scotland and England. I'm Anita Asante. Today, we'll be getting that historical perspective from Jeannie Allett, and I'll be chatting to Tom Gary, who is a women's football writer for The Telegraph.
If it wasn't for Jeannie and her colleagues and their efforts, then we simply would not be anywhere near where we are today.
This is My Moments in History, kicking off the women's game. I'd love to hear you share a memory from that specific game in 1972. I heard a story, Jeannie, that on that day, you ended up, when you were travelling to that game, you ended up sleeping at Waterloo Station just so you could, arrive and play for England. Can you remember anything about that time?
I did sleep on a London station after one of the international matches because who had money in those days? I couldn't afford a train ticket. I slept there overnight and I thumbed it back home the next day.
Did you just say there that you hitchhiked? You hitchhiked to try and get to your international match. I mean, how safe was that during that time to do?
I always did. I always hitchhiked, whether it was for Foden's ladies or for the England team. I always hitchhiked, always down to London, from Crewe to London. There was no money. I had no choice.
I'm absolutely gobsmacked, to be honest with you. I knew that the players had to sort of pay their own way to get to a match, but I never realised it was quite like that. And now I'm slightly embarrassed, really, because the sort of things that we perhaps grumble about in the press pack, maybe as if there wasn't a cup of hot tea, or perhaps we were struggling with the Wi-Fi, and that's nothing compared to having to hitchhike to go and represent your country. It really puts it into perspective.
I mean, I'm just in awe because I think of the challenges that I have maybe faced in the game, and I don't know if I would have dared, do what you did, Jeannie, to try and play for your national team. And I just think how many women and girls of your generation had to make those sacrifices and actually put yourself potentially in danger to do that, to do the things you love. Why did you not give up?
No way. When somebody loves football as much as I did and still do, you do anything. And whether I was thumbing it to St Helens, thumbing it to London, thumbing it to Sandbach, I just did it. I didn't even think. I was 15, 16, lived for football. But, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, it was a man's world. And there wasn't much really done for ladies' football. And I used to come over on a yearly basis to Rotterdam when I used to play for Foden's and play against some of the Dutch girls. And you make friends. And they said, why don't you come on over? I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. So I came here and I never went back. I think you were appreciated and supported. It's those watching the games. It didn't matter that you were a woman. The support was just fantastic.
Just to bring you in here, Tom, obviously Jeannie talked there about obviously the cultural differences between the Netherlands and England. But, she said it was a man's world at that time. And that's what basically sent her over to the Netherlands.
Yeah, it's really sad to hear that, but I guess also not surprising because that's a familiar tale for a lot of players like Jeannie. And you could argue that it is, to a large degree, still a man's world. It's quite depressing, actually, that's still not gone away. But I'm glad, at least, that there was a lot more respect for the women's game in the Netherlands, and it's nice to see that in England maybe things are slightly now catching up. And I think one of the things we did see in the summer during the Women's Euros was a lot more respect for the football as football than I've ever seen before.
And it was interesting that Jeannie said about the opportunities, that's what took her over to the Netherlands, because I can kind of relate to that. I left for the USA in 2009 to go and play professionally because the opportunities weren't here in England, and that's a significant amount of time, even considering your generations. But, I'm really curious as well to know how, Tom, you became a women's sports writer. What inspired you to do that?
I had quite a bit of interest in the women's game as a fan, probably because my family had always been Birmingham City supporters. And if you're a Birmingham City supporter, you haven't had much success to cheer about on the men's side for the last, ever really. But in the women's side, they were usually quite good. So it's a sort of thing that you paid a bit more attention to than others may have done. But I was given an opportunity in 2015 to cover the season that summer in the WSL, and I've just never wanted to stop doing it from then onwards, really. Been very lucky, and I did several years at the BBC, and then a couple of years ago moved to write full-time for the Daily Telegraph, covering just the women's game, because that was something that really attracted me, because they have a team there just to cover women's sport, which I thought was really inspiring.
And Jeannie, what was the coverage like when you were playing? I mean, what are your thoughts about Tom's entry into covering women's football as a journalist?
I take my hat off to Tom, to be honest, because I've never spoken to men reporters, to tell you the truth. And I was in Wembley on the 9th of October, and I met all the girls from the 1972 team. And these are things that you'll never forget. So, Tom, I take my hat off to you for getting involved into women's football, supporting us. I think it's fantastic, and there should be more coverage.
Jeannie, how did that make you feel? Obviously, you were there at Wembley, being honoured, and, to know now that you're being celebrated in this way, when for so much of your career playing the game, you were basically ignored. What was the emotions that you kind of felt on that day?
Emotions were very high with me and all the girls. We all shed a tear. I just can't explain what a feeling it was, standing on that field with 74,000 people clapping for you, realising if it wasn't for this team, God knows where ladies football would be today. It was a moment I'll cherish till the end.
You create history in 1972, and to think now, why don't you seek that recognition or acknowledgement of what you achieved then?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. Maybe it's not in me. I've had a fantastic time with England. I've got no words for it, and it's up to these young girls now playing for England to carry on what we started.
If I tell you, Jeannie, that there were more than 200 accredited journalists at the England-Austria game on the opening night of the Euros, how does that compare to your experience of media coverage from your time?
To be honest, once I get on that field, if there's 50 journalists or 50,000 people around the field, I don't see them, I don't hear them. I go, I play, I want to win, and then I leave the field. When I used to play for England, I was just proud to put that shirt on, get on that field, win, and then go home again.
If it wasn't for Jeannie and her colleagues and their efforts, then we simply would not be anywhere near where we are today in terms of what we have now, where we have a fully professional league in England. We have, nutritionists, full-time physios, goalkeeper coaches. We have analysts, way beyond just a manager and player. And that growth has all come down to the efforts of the generation who essentially defied the ban, who were told you can't play football and played anyway. And that defiance and that resilience, that forever will be a debt that future women's players will owe to them forevermore.
Tom, you talked about the way the media approach some of these stories related to women's footballers, but what are you doing personally to challenge, do you think, sexism within the industry related to these stories?
Well, I'm always asking for more. I'm always asking for more space in the paper. Always asking for more opportunities to go to cover stories. And I guess we just got to keep asking. I've got to keep asking, and others in positions like mine, I'm sure will do the same, because we often feel that pushback because there's a perception, I think, in our industry that not enough people will read a story about the women's game, but I know that audience is out there, so I am very determined to keep fighting for more space. I really do think I will cover England winning the World Cup. I really think that that's something that my colleagues and I will be covering in the near future. England are in a wonderful place in terms of the national side, and that's something that I really think we'll be writing about, and all of the journeys that those players have been on to get there.
Jeannie, I just want to know, what would you say to journalists like Tom about the significance of that England-Scotland game in 1972 that you were part of?
I'm so proud to be a member of that 1972 team, and then it was due to us that ladies football is where we are today. That just gives you a kick, it was worth the thumbing. It was worth taking a risk just to put that shirt on.
Thanks to Jeannie Allott and Tom Gary and all the guests for joining me in my moment in history, kicking off the women's game. There are more episodes for you to listen to on BBC Sounds. And if you want to keep up with women's sport, you can listen to the Women's Sports Show on BBC London.